it's not that we have an obesity epidemic in our culture, we have a stress epidemic in our culture. And a lot of people are relating to that by soothing themselves with the junk foods. And the food companies, of course, know very well how to exploit that. I mean, they just know how to do that. I mean,
have you ever wondered why some people struggle with their weight despite their best efforts? Dr. Gabor Maté reveals a surprising link between childhood trauma and obesity that might just shift your perspective on health. But it's not just about eating too much. Trauma impacts our brain's reward system, making us more susceptible to seeking solace in food. When children experience trauma, their brains develop differently, leading to changes in how they process rewards and stress. This altered response can make food a powerful coping mechanism, contributing to weight gain and obesity.
Across the world, the U.S. used to lead the world, but it doesn't anymore. It's Mexico now. The result is that there's somebody in Mexico diagnosed with diabetes every 38 minutes. A new case of diabetes, apparently. China, which a few decades ago knew no obesity at all, has got a huge epidemic of childhood obesity. And the writer Tom Hartman says that culture can be healthy or toxic, nurturing or murderous. And I graduated from medical school. I thought it was a very straightforward thing. You know, you take in more calories than you expend, you're going to put on weight. It's very simple. And I thought that all people needed was, you know, the facts. So somebody overweight would come into my office, I would point out to them that the extra weight, the extra adipose or fatty tissue means now you have more blood vessels that need to be conducting the flow of blood, so that means your heart has to work harder, so now you're going to put more pressure on your heart, so on and so forth. And you just, you know, all you need to do is know this, and this will give you enough incentive to lose weight. And for some reason, nobody ever lost weight because I pointed out to them the physiological facts. And it becomes clear after a while that when it comes to eating, I really like the food at this place. And here's what I noticed, which is typical of me, that the food arrives and I'm already worried about what happens when it's going to be finished. I mean, I just want to really enjoy it all, but I'm thinking this enjoyment is going to finish, it's going to end. And I'm already sorry that the enjoyment is going to end, which means that even as I'm eating in the present, I'm already thinking about the future. And there's a very dysfunctional relationship that we all have to food, that many of us have to food, and actually obesity is only a part of it. I mean, I think a lot of people have body image problems who are not at all obese. I mean, I do. I'm constantly judging my body and checking in the mirror about how big my belly happens to be that day, you know, and I've been doing this for decades. Anybody looking at me would think, here's a guy who's slim, but that's not my self-image. My self-image was set in my teenage years when I was overweight, and I've never lost that self-image. Mm. So we're struggling against, number one, the fear of loss of enjoyment. Number two, whatever our body image happens to be. It works both ways. A lot of people who are overweight don't think of themselves as being overweight. On the other hand, a lot of people who are underweight think of themselves as being totally out of control when it comes to their eating. So, in other words, we have a relationship to our bodies that is not reality-based. It's based on something else. Well, what is it based on? That's one of the things we'll be looking at today. I'm just reading a life of the Buddha. He's quite an amazing guy. And this is what I happened to read this morning or last night, so I thought this would be a great thing to start with. So the story goes that the Buddha is, you know, established in his enlightenment practice, and he's got a body of followers, you know, the Sangha, who are his pupils and his acolytes, and some Brahmin, some priestly venerable hears about him and sends his student to check out the Buddha. Is this guy really for real? So this student watches the Buddha over several days and observes him and comes back to report to his teacher that, yeah, this guy really is the real deal. And here's what he says, amongst other things. He says, when he receives rice, he does not raise or lower the bowl or tip it forwards or backwards. He receives neither too little nor too much rice. He adds sauces in the right proportions. He does not exceed the right amount of sauce in the mouthful. He turns the mouthful over 3 or 4 times in his mouth and then swallows it. And no rice grain enter his body unmasticated. In other words, he doesn't swallow his food until he chews it. Nor does he maintain any in his mouth. This is how you tell if somebody's enlightened, you see. You just watch them eat rice. So this guy, the Buddha, is eating rice, and he chews every mouthful several times, and he chews everything before he swallows it, and he doesn't take another bite till all the stuff that he's just chewed is actually swallowed. Now, enlightenment is so simple, you see. I mean, how many of you have ever eaten like that, even once? That present to what you're doing. He's not worried about, oh my God, the meal's going to be over in 5 minutes, and I'm going to then, no longer be experiencing these pleasurable sensations. He's just doing it in the moment. He tastes his food experiencing the taste without experiencing greed for the taste. So he's just experiencing it in the moment, but he's not saying, how can I hold on to this? How can I get more? The food he takes has 5 factors. It is neither for amusement nor for intoxication. So it's not about having a good time, and it's not about soothing anything. It's not about killing the pain. Nor is it for smartening, nor for embellishing, but only for the endurance and continuance of the body. In other words, he eats for the purpose that food was given to us for, which is to sustain the body. I mean, when you look at the culture that we have today, I mean, who in their right minds 30 years ago would have predicted that there's going to be a food channel where it's not about food as nourishment. It's about food as diversion. It's about food as ego. It's about food as entertainment. It's about food as titillation. It's about food as a contest of skill. Nothing to do with what food is actually for.
Obesity, an issue of increasing global concern, has reached alarmingly high levels worldwide, with Mexico standing out due to its severe diabetes epidemic. The problem is not confined to a single region, but rather it represents a widespread health crisis that spans across the globe. In many countries, including China, the rising trend of childhood obesity is closely linked to the adoption of Western dietary habits. This growing epidemic is not merely a health problem, but a reflection of deeper societal issues. The food culture, driven by profit and convenience, often prioritizes short-term gains over long-term health. Understanding obesity as a symptom of a toxic culture, rather than just an individual failing, is crucial for addressing its root causes and developing effective prevention strategies. This perspective shifts the focus from individual blame to systemic change, emphasizing the need for broader societal adjustments.
He's not using it for the ending of discomfort. I'm sorry, he's using it for the endurance and continuance of the body, for the ending of discomfort, which is to say the satiation of hunger, and for assisting the holy life. In other words, food actually has a spiritual purpose in his life. And that's one way to be, which is precisely what we as a society don't understand anything about. And so that's how the Buddha ate, and that's how this young priest observed him to be an enlightened one. So when you look at our relationship to food in our society, what is it actually all about? Well, whether we're looking at people that eat too much, or whether we're looking at people who who starve themselves, we just say anorexics. So you got both ends of the eating spectrum, if you will. But really, they're both at the same end of the spectrum, because their relationship to food is actually determined by suffering. So their relationship to food is in some way to not to deal with suffering, but to transcend it. A friend of mine, a physician in the States, a colleague I should say, but he's sort of a friend. His name is Dr. Vincent Felitti, and he's an internal medicine specialist in San Diego, and he was working at a food clinic, at least an obesity clinic, and they found at this clinic that they could successfully help people lose weight by rigorous dietary control. But what couldn't they do you imagine?
Shift it that way.
They couldn't help them keep it off. People kept putting it back on and putting it back on. And Felitti finally did something quite extraordinary for a physician. He actually listened to his patients. And what they told him was, well, I'll read you what he says. Here we unexpectedly discovered that histories of childhood sexual abuse were common, as were histories of growing up in markedly dysfunctional households. It became evident that traumatic life experiences during childhood and adolescence were far more common in an obese population than was comfortably recognized. We slowly discovered that major weight loss is often sexually or physically threatening, and that obesity, whatever its health risks, is protective emotionally. In other words, food addiction is that it wasn't the fundamental problem. It was actually the person's attempt to solve a problem. The problem that arose out of early childhood trauma. This observation led to the very famous adverse childhood experiences studies, the ACE studies, where they looked at a large population in the Kaiser Permanente system. Kaiser Permanente is a big insurer and health provider.
Many individuals grapple with a profound and often unconscious fear of loss, which significantly impacts their body image and relationship with food. This fear of losing something valuable, whether it's pleasure, comfort, or control, manifests in various ways, deeply influencing how people approach their eating habits and self-perception. For many, food is more than just sustenance. It's a source of comfort and pleasure. The fear of losing this source of comfort can lead to an unhealthy relationship with eating. When people experience anxiety or stress, they might turn to food as a means of coping, seeking solace in the familiar taste and texture of their favorite comfort foods. This pattern often creates a cycle where food becomes a tool for managing emotional discomfort, rather than just a means of nourishment. This fear of loss can also extend to body image issues. The idea of losing the enjoyment or comfort associated with certain foods can lead to restrictive eating patterns or unhealthy behaviors. For example, some individuals might overeat in response to emotional stress, while others might excessively restrict their intake to maintain a certain body image. Both responses are driven by a deep-seated fear of losing something valuable, whether it's the pleasure derived from eating or the control over one's body. Moreover, societal pressures and unrealistic standards of beauty can exacerbate these fears. The constant bombardment of idealized body images in media can lead to a distorted self-image and an unhealthy preoccupation with body weight and appearance. This external pressure often compounds personal fears, making individuals more susceptible to engaging in harmful eating behaviors to achieve or maintain a certain body type. Addressing these issues requires a multifaceted approach. It's essential to explore and understand the emotional triggers that drive these fears and their impact on eating habits and body image. Therapy and counseling can provide valuable support in uncovering and addressing these underlying fears, helping individuals develop healthier coping mechanisms and a more balanced perspective on food and body image. Additionally, fostering a positive body image and self-acceptance, is crucial. This involves challenging societal standards and focusing on health and well-being rather than mere appearance. By promoting a more holistic view of health, one that values emotional well-being and self-compassion, alongside physical health, individuals can begin to break free from the cycle of fear and unhealthy behaviors. The struggle with fear of loss and its impact on body image is a complex issue rooted in emotional and psychological factors. By addressing these underlying fears and fostering a more positive relationship with food and body image, individuals can work towards a healthier, more balanced approach to eating and self-perception.
In the States, they looked at 17,000 or 14 to 17,000 adults, and they elicited the history of childhood, and they found there were 10 categories of childhood averages from abuse, neglect, a parent dying, a parent being jailed, violence. Yeah. But it also shows the tremendous resistance to this kind of information, to any kind of relationship to of health problems to trauma is just difficult for the medical mind to accept, and the result is that all these problems, like obesity, is seen as a mechanical problem of people, as I thought of it when I finished medical school. People eating more than they burn up. That's all. That's the only problem. But as to what drives people to do that never occurred to me in the beginning, and it certainly doesn't occur to a lot of clinicians today either. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the New York Times just in the last year that quite a few doctors actually discriminate against obese people. They're just not comfortable with them. They don't want them in their offices. Which is interesting. And what does that tell us about the medical mind? Well, I can come to that later. But you saw what happened to Rob Ford last year. Now, Rob Ford is the mayor of Toronto, who turns out is a cocaine addict. Now he's turned out to have cancer as well. And he's been significantly overweight for many years. All you have to do is look at the guy, you know he's a traumatized person. In absolute denial of his trauma. This is why, if you want to deny trauma, go into politics. And then you get to be prime minister. well, think about it. Think about it. I mean, if you actually look at our prime minister, first of all, he's got a weight problem.
Our interactions with food often transcend mere nourishment, becoming deeply intertwined with our emotional and psychological states. For many, food serves as a form of entertainment or a diversion from suffering. The desire to transcend pain through eating or dieting highlights a broader issue, using food as a coping mechanism. The challenge lies in understanding how our relationship with food is shaped by our experiences, and how we can shift from using it as a distraction to seeing it as a tool for holistic well-being. Recognizing food as part of a larger emotional landscape is essential for developing healthier eating patterns and overcoming the suffering associated with disordered eating. This understanding can lead to more meaningful changes in how we approach food and overall health.
He's always fighting the bulge, the battle of the bulge. He's always up against that. Secondly, if you look in that guy's eyes, what do you actually see? Nothing.
Yeah.
Now, how does somebody end up with nothing in their eyes?
Trauma.
It's an emotional shutdown in the face of trauma is what that is. All you have to do is look at Harper. And if his policies weren't so destructive, it's very difficult for me to work up any kind of compassion for him just because I am so upset by what he does in this world. But on an individual level, he's a traumatized being. And those dead eyes of his, they're the dead giveaway, if you want to put it that way, of trauma. And so Ford, who then becomes this bombastic pseudo-populist mayor, and is addicted to cocaine or whatever he uses and drinks and overeats, then becomes a laughingstock. And so he goes on all these, and he's so unaware that he wants the attention so badly that he goes on all these American laugh shows. Yes, the more sedentary the parents are, the more likely the obese the kid will be. The more junk food the parents eat, the more likely the kid is going to be obese. But the harsher the parents are, also the more likely to be the kid is to be obese. And there's an article, it says an article I've collected a whole bunch of articles on eating because I'm writing this book. New research suggests that authoritarian parenting style is worse for children's weight than an authoritative one. The study of 37,000 Canadian children found that those of authoritarian parents were 30% more likely to be obese at 2 to 5 years old. So the Tiger Mom, which again, like, is a huge deal, the Tiger Mom, I don't know how many millions of copies that book sold, it's absolutely toxic, vicious stuff. Because it's basically anti-child. And the Tiger Mom is going to create more obesity, actually. Why? Because human beings have a fundamental need, and that fundamental need is basically to be loved. And being loved doesn't just mean that parents feel love for you. But parents feeling love for you does not mean that you're going to experience being loved. A lot of parents love their kids. I loved my kids, but that doesn't mean that my kids experience being loved. I loved them particularly when they were asleep, and next morning, but it's next morning that they need to feel the love, not when they're sleeping. And that means being accepted and valued and celebrated and enjoyed for who they are. But that's the nourishing thing that kids need. And fundamentally, anytime that need is frustrated, whether because people are traumatized and abused or neglected, or whether the parents are too distracted or too depressed to meet the child's needs, that child is going to be short of a fundamental nourishing experience that they will then spend the rest of their lives trying to compensate for. One way to compensate for it is through oral soothing. What do you do with babies when they're crying? We stick a nipple in their mouths. If the kid is lucky, it'll be a real nipple. If the kid is not lucky, it'll be a plastic nipple. But clearly, oral intake and being soothed by a caring person are very closely associated in the mind. So what this is all about is self-nourishing. So anytime somebody's got a dysfunctional relationship to food, it fundamentally means that they have a dysfunctional relationship to themselves, and they're trying to soothe themselves. Now, typically, when do people do that? When they're stressed. So if any of you, I don't have an obesity problem, but I'm also quite compulsive about how I relate to food and exercise and all that. It's not a bad thing, but it's not an easy relationship necessarily. And I can tell you just from my own experience that when I'm more likely to cram down some junk food is precisely when I'm stressed. Because the junk foods actually release hormones and substances in the brain that soothe stress. So it's not that we have an obesity epidemic in our culture, we have a stress epidemic in our culture. And a lot of people are relating to that by soothing themselves with the junk foods. And the food companies, of course, know very well how to exploit that. They just know how to do that. There was a book last year called Sugar, Fat, and Salt or something like that. That was the title. And the author found that the food companies, Kellogg and Kraft and all these, the wonderful ads, My God, talk about ads. I was in Colombia, Bogota. I'll come back to this point in a moment. But I was in Bogota, Colombia, 10 days ago. And Bogota is the capital of Colombia, and it's got this plaza, Simón Bolívar Plaza. Simón Bolívar was the liberator of Latin America, from the Spanish. And so there's a square named after him with his statue, and this on this giant square, which is Bogota's main square, there was a demonstration being held, and what we heard was a loud megaphone, amplified voice, talking about Coca-Cola. And there were 5 people on stage. 4 of them wore masks, so they didn't want to be identified by the police. And these were Coca-Cola workers that were protesting the policies of Coca-Cola, which are murderous. So people that try to organize unions in the Coca-Cola factory in Bogota, they're likely to be tortured and jailed and so on. And these people were brave enough to hold a demonstration against that. There was nobody there. Nobody was there to them. Bogota is a city of 7 million people. People were either indifferent, too beaten down by the system, or too afraid to show up for the demonstration. And I'm thinking about advertising here because you all know that beautiful ad. I love to buy the world of Coke. Not does it go something about love, right? Isn't it? What's the line?
I'd like to buy the world.
Coke and keep it company, right?
Social harmony.
Yeah, and this is loving Coca-Cola. So these companies just know how to get at us, you know. And McDonald's has been for years. The advertising appeals to what? People's need for family contact. So the family's all discombobulated and stressed, and they go to McDonald's and now we can be together as a loving family. And those same companies know exactly. Spain, many restaurants are closed for lunch. Can you believe that? Restaurant closed for lunch because they're having their feast and their siesta with their families. And they don't snack between meals. They don't have to be constantly trying to satisfy themselves orally. So it's not even the type of food so much as just the relationship to the food that creates the problem or avoids the problem. So in our society, food, because of the breakdown of emotional nourishment, food has become a substitute. And not to mention that because when people lack mastery in their lives, when they feel that they don't exercise real power over their lives, well then you'll move towards activities where you can have some power and you can really be the creator, you know. So when you start fiddling with food in a creative way, you're the creator, right?
Childhood trauma, encompassing experiences such as abuse, neglect, and exposure to family dysfunction, has a profound and often enduring impact on various aspects of an individual's life, including their physical health. One of the significant outcomes of such early adverse experiences is an increased risk of developing obesity later in life. This connection between childhood trauma and obesity is both complex and multifaceted, reflecting the deep interplay between psychological stress and physical health. Research consistently shows that individuals who have endured traumatic experiences during their formative years are more likely to struggle with obesity and related health issues. This association can be attributed to several interrelated factors. For one, trauma can disrupt normal emotional development, leading to difficulties in managing stress and regulating emotions. In many cases, food becomes a coping mechanism, a way to deal with the emotional pain and stress stemming from early traumatic experiences. This reliance on food for comfort or distraction can contribute to unhealthy eating patterns and consequently weight gain. Moreover, childhood trauma often alters the body's stress response system. Chronic stress resulting from trauma can lead to hormonal imbalances, particularly involving cortisol, which plays a role in fat storage and appetite regulation. Elevated cortisol levels associated with prolonged stress can promote cravings for high-calorie, sugary foods, which are often linked to weight gain. This biological response, coupled with emotional eating, creates a vicious cycle, reinforcing unhealthy weight patterns. The impact of childhood trauma on obesity is not solely confined to physiological effects. It also includes behavioral and psychological dimensions. Individuals who have experienced trauma may develop maladaptive coping strategies, including disordered eating behaviors such as binge eating or emotional eating. These behaviors are often rooted in a need to manage or numb the psychological pain associated with trauma, leading to further weight gain and associated health complications. Addressing the impact of childhood trauma on obesity requires a comprehensive and trauma-informed approach to healthcare. Traditional methods of treating obesity, which often focus on diet and exercise alone, may not be sufficient for individuals with a history of trauma. Instead, treatment should integrate an understanding of trauma's effects on both the mind and body, emphasizing the need for emotional support and strategies that address the root causes of unhealthy eating behaviors. Therapeutic interventions, such as trauma-focused therapy, can be instrumental in helping individuals process their past experiences and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Additionally, creating supportive environments that foster emotional healing and self-compassion is crucial for overcoming the effects of trauma on weight and overall health. By addressing both the psychological and physical aspects of obesity, individuals can achieve more sustainable and meaningful improvements in their health. The link between childhood trauma and obesity highlights the importance of considering early adverse experiences in understanding and addressing weight-related health issues.
Well, that's okay. It's even a part of human life. But why is it so important? It's so important because we lack that capacity to create in so many aspects of our lives. So food becomes a substitute again for something that's much more important. At the other end of the behavioral spectrum, but not of the trauma spectrum, you've got anorexia or bulimia. Now, again, I've never met an anorexic or bulimic who was not a traumatized person. And what you've got in anorexia is fundamentally, I think, a person who is desperately trying to exert some control over themselves, and that's the only thing they can control, is what's going to enter their orifices. So, and it's also a way of resisting. That's the one thing the parents can't control. It's how you can eat. So. Or whether you go to the bathroom afterwards and you throw up. And that bulimic urge, from people that I've talked to, it's got an addictive quality to it. There's the buildup of tension, the anticipation, and then the release, which is the same in any addictive behavior. And then you have the shame that follows, which is also what happens in any addictive behavior. So whether we're looking at overeating or rigid, self-destructive undereating, we're looking at responses to trauma in the past. And what we're looking at in the present is an excess of stress that we haven't found a way to deal with. So that it's not a question of bad habits, it's a question of how do we deal with the stresses in our lives. And a lot of us, you know, if I find my stress relief through shopping, well, I mean, that's not going to show up on my body. It might show up in my bank account, but it's not going to show up in my body.
Public figures often serve as mirrors reflecting broader societal issues, including trauma and its manifestations. Weight fluctuations and emotional shutdowns in celebrities can indicate underlying trauma. The societal obsession with appearances and the pressure on public figures to maintain certain images often leads to denial and unhealthy behaviors. These visible struggles highlight the broader issue of how trauma impacts individuals, regardless of their public status. Examining these patterns helps us understand the personal and societal implications of trauma and underscores the need for compassionate approaches to mental and physical health. By recognizing these patterns, we can better address the needs of individuals in the public eye and beyond.
If I find that through exercise, I might even have a body that people envy. But of course, I can have an addictive relationship to exercise too. I mean, anybody can. It's not the behavior. It's never the behavior, by the way, that tells you whether it's addictive or not. It's your relationship to it. So any behavior that has craving, pleasure, and relief associated with it in the short term, but negative consequences in the long term, and you can't. Addiction medicine defines addiction as a primary brain disease, about 50% determined by genetics. This is the official medical view of addiction. It's total nonsense. If it's 5%, I'd be surprised. But there's something comforting about explaining things by genetic causation, because we don't have to look at people's pain. We don't look at people's trauma. We don't have to look at social toxicity. We can just put it down to genes. Well, the gene is not causing the obesity. It's the need to soothe yourself with junk food that's causing the obesity. It's just that if you have the gene, you're going to be more likely to pack on the weight. But the gene is not causing you to be obese, which is incidentally true of most genes when it comes to most diseases too. There are some genes that will directly cause disease, but they're relatively rare. As to why we have such a problem with understanding this very simple fact, and why people aren't helped more to come to terms with their trauma when it comes to their eating issues, do it in themselves. Therefore, they can't confront it, the cause of it, in anybody else either. Which is why you can go to a rheumatologist. I can tell you, for example, if any of you have an autoimmune illness here, anybody? Rheumatoid arthritis, what do you got? Are you going to say?
Psoriasis.
Psoriasis, okay. And you?
Yeah, rosacea.
Rosacea? Okay. Anybody ever ask you about your childhood? In the doctor's office?
No.
No.
Okay. Stresses? How you relate to yourself?
No.
Any of that? But psoriasis and rosacea are both stress-driven and trauma-driven diseases, conditions. To one degree or another. And it's the body's way of reacting to stress. Incidentally, how do we treat these conditions? What kind of cream did they give you? Steroid cream. Cortisol cream. What is cortisol? It's a stress hormone. It never occurs to us. We're treating all these conditions: rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, multiple sclerosis, eczema, psoriasis, with stress hormones. You think that there's a simple light would go up in the mind that says, my gosh, I'm having to give high quantities of stress hormone to treat these conditions. Is it possible that this condition is any way related to stress? It seems like such an obvious question. But it doesn't occur. And I was lecturing to medical students today at UBC, and I know that in 4 years, the only lecture they've ever had on stress, trauma, and all that would have been the one they heard today from me. And so no wonder then that, you walk into the average health caregiver's office, you're just not going to be helped to understand yourself. Now, where does that leave us? Well,
Parenting styles play a crucial role in shaping a child's health and well-being, including their risk of developing obesity. Research consistently shows that the ways in which parents interact with their children, guide their behaviors, and manage their daily routines can have a significant impact on their children's weight and overall health. For instance, authoritative parenting, characterized by a balance of responsiveness and demandingness, tends to promote healthier eating habits and more active lifestyles. In contrast, authoritarian parenting, which is marked by strict rules and limited emotional support, has been linked to a higher risk of obesity in children. This style often involves rigid control over what children eat and how they behave, but it may lack the nurturing component necessary for healthy emotional development. Additionally, Permissive parenting, where parents are overly lenient and provide minimal boundaries, can also contribute to obesity. This approach often leads to less structure around mealtimes and physical activity, resulting in poor dietary choices and sedentary habits. Furthermore, parents who model unhealthy eating behaviors or have sedentary lifestyles themselves can inadvertently pass these patterns on to their children, reinforcing unhealthy habits. Understanding the influence of different parenting styles on child obesity highlights the importance of promoting positive parenting practices. Educating parents about the benefits of balanced and supportive approaches can help in fostering environments that encourage healthy eating, regular physical activity, and overall well-being. Encouraging parents to set clear, achievable goals, provide consistent guidance, and offer emotional support can make a significant difference in preventing and managing obesity in children. By addressing these parenting dynamics, we can work towards reducing obesity rates and enhancing family health, creating a foundation for healthier generations to come.
That's because under conditions of early stress and trauma, the reward apparatus doesn't develop properly. So you probably have fewer dopamine receptors, fewer endorphin receptors, and so on, which means you need more stimulation to satisfy those circuits. But that can also be overcome with time. The brain does have the capacity to develop new circuits, and that takes mindful attention, and it takes... It leaves us... basically, I say to people, this is why there's a place like Empower Health. I say to people, well, okay, so what are you complaining for? So your doctor didn't talk to you about stress. Well, if you go to the butcher store, do you expect to buy cookies? No. What do you expect to buy at the butcher? I expect to buy meat or fish. Great. So when you go to the butcher store, don't ask for cookies. They don't have any. When you go to the bakery, don't ask for a cut of sirloin. They're not going to have it. When you go to the doctor's office, don't ask for stuff they can't know how to give you. They know certain things to do, and they can be very helpful. Go for it. But if you want other kind of help, go to a different place. So first of all, we have to broaden our sense of what constitutes health care. So even the phrase complementary medicine or alternative treatment drives me crazy. Alternative to what? It's like there's the standard, which is the mainstream medical triumphs. I'm far from being it. In other words, not making it into a mechanical food problem, but really see that it's their attempt to solve a problem in their lives, like Dr. Felitti says, and be very, very mindful about it. Now, it's probably true that the people who are driven to overeat, there's something different about their brains. But that's true about addicts in general. In other words, the reward centers in the brain.
It becomes like when you learn so much about what's healthy and what's not. It's like the gluten-free, sugar-free, free,
Well, okay, but what is it really? It's a fear, and it's probably, it's probably a direct response to trauma in the sense that something's entering your body that it's going to damage you. That usually means that something already did.
In Mexico, rising obesity rates are closely linked to the consumption of modified, nutrient-depleted foods. Multinational companies and trade agreements have influenced the food landscape, contributing to health issues. The consumption of these altered foods impacts the nervous system and overall well-being, highlighting the need for greater awareness and changes in food policies. Addressing these issues requires a comprehensive approach that includes promoting healthier food options and implementing effective regulatory measures to combat the negative effects of modified foods on public health. Trauma can lead to anxiety related to breathing, making it challenging for some individuals to focus on this aspect of their health. For those affected, alternative techniques that focus on different body sensations may offer more relief and support. Understanding these nuances can help tailor therapeutic approaches to better meet the needs of individuals dealing with trauma and anxiety. By exploring diverse methods of managing anxiety and promoting well-being, we can enhance support for those struggling with these issues. Exploring alternatives to traditional medication can provide additional support for health management. Methods such as dietary changes, mindfulness practices, and holistic approaches offer valuable supplements to conventional treatments. These alternatives can address underlying issues and improve overall health outcomes. Integrating these approaches into healthcare provides a more comprehensive strategy for managing various health conditions. By incorporating diverse methods, we can enhance patient care and support well-being from multiple angles. Overcoming trauma involves developing self-awareness and addressing unresolved issues. This process requires exploring personal experiences and understanding how they influence current behaviors and attitudes. Techniques such as therapy, mindfulness, and self-reflection can aid in this journey, helping individuals achieve greater emotional balance and resilience. By focusing on these aspects, individuals can work towards healing and improving their overall quality of life. Addressing trauma comprehensively supports long-term well-being and personal growth. Combating toxic food culture involves addressing the systemic issues that drive unhealthy eating habits. This requires changes in food marketing, education, and public policies to promote healthier choices and support overall well-being. Encouraging a shift towards more nutritious options and fostering awareness about the impact of food culture on health is essential for creating a healthier society. By tackling these issues, we can improve dietary habits and support long-term health and wellness.
Yeah, any other questions or comments, yes, please?
Are there certain healthy foods that help build dopamine and
Healthy foods that build dopamine? That's probably better asked of my naturopathic friends. I'm not a nutritionist, and I just don't know the answer. Is there an answer to that?
Yes, it's more based on the picture of the individual patients, because it's a lot to do with actually getting adequate nutrients, but then also when you eat it, eating regularly. So there's a lot more to it than just the type of food, but
I know one thing, this doesn't answer your question, but in Mexico, for example, where obesity is going up and up and up, the corn that they eat now, as a result of the multinationals and a free trade agreement, they no longer eat that healthy, home ground corn that kept them very healthy, basically. And now they're getting modified and diluted of nutrients. So for sure there are foods that are good for you. I'm just not a trained nutritionist. Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about mindfulness as a way to help approach these issues. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner.
Right,
so
okay.
We work with the nervous system. I don't know if you can say anything to talking about the underlying nervous system dysregulation that can actually make mindfulness really impossible for some traumatized individuals.
Right, well, why don't you say something about it?
Okay, sure.
Are you talking about Peter Levine's thing?
Yeah.
Peter and I are writing my next book together.
Yeah.
Yeah. But go on, say something about
Well, there's a lot of activation in the nervous system. People are going to have trouble even being mindful because there's too much chaos on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So without addressing the nervous system first and sort of establishing the safety in the system,
Right.
so that things can start to have a bit more space, so that some of the charge can start to come out. I get frustrated when I only hear about mindfulness, when it doesn't address how so many people can't do that.
Right. Fair enough. That reminds me of a conversation I had with Bessel van der Kolk, who's another trauma expert, and him and I were presenting at a conference in New York, and sitting at a table with a bunch of people, and people were talking about how, thing is to pay attention to the breath. But somebody at the table made the same point that people who've been traumatized, the breath actually makes them totally anxious.
Yeah.
So somebody said better the butt than the breath. So if you can't be pay attention to your butt.
Yeah.
And that's better than the breath for some people.
Yeah.
So you got to really get into the body.
And that's the real point. It's so individual, right?
Yeah.
You can't apply one solution to a mass of people,
Right.
because we're all so different and unique in our responses.
That's right. That's right.
So I've heard many of your talks and I've read your books, and I'm curious about one thing, is that given all the different addictions that we all know have the same base,
Yeah.
and the base being trauma and all, and that need to fulfill something, so whether it's a work addiction or, something that's actually maybe rewarded in society, or something, as what we're talking about tonight.
To me, it seems like that it's almost impossible in the world that we live in that somebody actually does not have an addiction. And so when you talk about these studies, and they say the addicted versus they found that 30% have these addictions. So what does it look like for people who, what do lives of people who are not addicted
Actually look like?
Go to the main forest to find out.
Because these studies are done in Western, a lot of them are done in Western countries, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, if it's 30%, then what does the other 70% look like? How are they living?
Well, here's the problem. Listen, Paul, you're quite right. I mean, there's hardly anybody in our society that in some way doesn't that escapes completely. There's hardly anybody, precisely for the reason that you mentioned, and the studies don't even get at all the trauma. Because you can ask people what happened. Were you sexually abused, neglected? Did your father die? Did your parents get a divorce?
Food companies often exploit consumers through sophisticated advertising tactics that promote unhealthy eating habits. Major brands manipulate food products and marketing strategies to create addictive patterns in consumers. For example, companies like Kellogg and Kraft use persuasive advertising to drive sales, while Coca-Cola workers in Bogota have protested against harmful corporate practices. These tactics highlight the need for greater consumer awareness and regulatory measures to combat the manipulation of food products and marketing that contribute to health crises like obesity. Understanding these strategies is essential for making informed choices and advocating for changes that promote healthier eating habits. McDonald's advertising campaigns often target family values and togetherness, while subtly manipulating food composition to foster addiction. By combining sugar and fat in highly addictive ways, McDonald's creates a cycle of consumption that is difficult to break. This strategy not only promotes unhealthy eating, but also contributes to long-term health issues. Understanding these manipulative tactics is crucial for consumers to make informed choices and for policymakers to address the broader impact of such practices on public health. Recognizing how these tactics affect eating habits can lead to more effective strategies for promoting healthier food choices and combating obesity.
Incidentally, parents, when there's marriage strife, the kids are more likely to be obese, by the way. You can ask them these questions. But these studies, what they don't take into account is kids who weren't traumatized overtly, but who just didn't get their needs met. So there's something called developmental trauma that has nothing to do with bad stuff happening. It just has to do with good stuff not happening.
Which isn't in the ACE study, though.
Which, sorry?
That's not in the ACE.
It's not in the ACE study because they don't know about that.
Yeah.
I've talked to Philippe about that, and he doesn't quite get it.
It's one of the hugest things.
Yeah.
That's the thing that all of us almost.
Absolutely, and they don't talk about it, and it's hard to study what didn't happen.
Yeah.
Were you sexually abused, yes or no? It's either yes or you weren't. Were you hit, either yes or you weren't hit.
Yeah.
But what didn't happen, which is that getting that nurturing, attuned attention, that's much more difficult to study, and people aren't quite attuned to that particular question. But as to what a non-addicted person looks like, well, let me read you what let me read you what a non-addicted. Let me read you what a non-addicted person looks like, okay? This is out of a book called Memoirs of an Addicted Brain by a neuroscientist called Mark Lewis. And Lewis himself talks about his own addictions and the brain physiology of addiction and all that. But he describes what happens when he goes to Malaysia and he comes across some Aboriginal people, including a father and a son, standing on a forest path. And I'm going to read you this description, if I can find it. Here it is. Just before reaching the highlands, almost desperate now for a shower and a normal meal, I met a pair of Orang Asli, who is Aboriginal tribe, who looked just like they just stepped out of a time machine. I was ahead of the others, so I was the first to see them. A man and a boy of 10 or 12, father and son, I was sure. They stood so still that I almost bumped into them, and my first reaction was fear. The man had a blowgun by his side. It was long as he was tall, and I knew it was equipped with a poison-tipped dart. He held it casually, upright beside him. He wore only a loincloth. The boy was completely naked. We gaped at each other, maybe just for a minute, but it seemed much longer. The man looked strong, confident, and proud. Not the kind of pride that comes from collected accomplishments, but the kind that comes from being completely at home in the world. His smile was magnificent. He seemed to revel in this unfathomable moment. There was nothing he needed to say or do. Now, have you ever felt there's nothing he needed to say or do? Ever? Have I? But the boy's expression and stance was even more remarkable. He regarded me with a face so open, so unclouded, that it seemed to lie outside the repertoire of the human. His eyes were a window between his body and the world outside him, uninterrupted by the opacity of the self. Get that? Uninterrupted by the opacity of the self. Not an atom of self-consciousness, not a hint of anxiety, no shyness, no attempt to please. Work to get to the point of comfort in our own skin, which is our birthright. Yeah.
I want to ask you a question, just like personally, like I know you in the line of work you do, and just what's your personal opinion about society and where that is going in the future with all this discussion, like, you know,
Okay.
the hunter-gatherer, and then how we have our society. Do you feel like we will move into that direction, or do you feel
Well, actually, it's getting worse. It's actually getting worse. But I mean, because it's getting worse, it's also getting better. Because the worse it gets, the more people wake up. And in my next book, as I said, it's called Toxic Culture. That's what I think about our society. It's a toxic culture. It makes people sick. And here's what Eric Fromm, who's a social psychologist who lived in the first half of the 20th century and wrote a book called, he wrote a number of books, including, it's called The Sane Society. And just want to find the quote by him, where he says, the fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues. The fact that they share so many of the same errors does not make these errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. And then he defines health, and here's what he says. I'm to answer your question about society. He says, I just finished the first 2 chapters of my book, and so I'm quoting from here. It says, mental health cannot be defined in terms of the adjustment of the individual society, but on the contrary, it must be defined in terms of the adjustment of society to the needs of man. And the same with physical health. So rather than see it as an individual thing, it's how does society adjust to the needs of the members of the society? Well, if you ask the question, how does this society adjust to the needs of its members? I go back to that quote by Tom Hartman, who says, culture can be healthy or toxic, nurturing or murderous. This is a toxic culture. Now, because of its very toxicity, more people are being forced to wake up. So we've got that now. A lot of people asking questions, looking for alternatives. But that's because it's got so dysfunctional. Sorry?
Survival natural.
Noam Chomsky, when he was asked if he's an optimist or a pessimist, he said that strategically I'm an optimist and tactically I'm a pessimist. So it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Anorexia and bulimia are often responses to trauma and stress, manifesting in extreme behaviors related to food. Anorexia involves controlling intake as a way to exert power over oneself, while bulimia reflects a cycle of tension and release, often driven by unresolved emotional issues. These disorders illustrate how trauma can influence eating behaviors, highlighting the need for comprehensive treatment approaches that address both the psychological and physical aspects of these conditions. Effective treatment requires understanding the connection between trauma and eating disorders to provide holistic care that addresses the root causes of these issues. Addiction is less about the specific behavior and more about the individual's relationship with it. Whether it's food, exercise, or another activity, addiction is characterized by an unhealthy relationship and compulsive patterns. For example, excessive exercise, though generally considered healthy, can become addictive if used as a coping mechanism. Recognizing this distinction is key to addressing addictive behaviors effectively and developing strategies that focus on healthier relationships with activities and substances. Understanding the nature of addiction in this broader context helps in creating more effective interventions and support systems for those affected. Individuals in high-power professions often enter these fields to manage their own pain by exerting control over others. This dynamic can prevent them from addressing their personal issues, which impacts their effectiveness in helping others. The inability to confront personal pain can hinder professional performance and overall well-being. Understanding this connection is crucial for fostering self-awareness and addressing the emotional needs of professionals to improve their effectiveness and personal health. By acknowledging and addressing these issues, we can support better mental health and performance in high-stress professions.
Okay. So Deepak says that addiction is alcohol, substance use. It's an attempt at a spiritual experience. Yeah. So he would say that because he's another one that doesn't want to look at trauma too much.
Yeah.
You know. But that doesn't mean there isn't truth in what he says. Because when you actually look at what is it the addict wants, what the addict wants.
So, how does this understanding change the way we approach health and parenting? Dr. Maté's insights could challenge our current strategies for managing weight and supporting children's well-being. Let's dive deeper into how these revelations could reshape our approach.
Is a sense of completion, of being whole. And I know from my own addictive behaviors that there's a moment when you actually feel whole. When do you feel whole? When you don't need anything. When you're not craving anything. And there's a brief moment, just as you've indulged, when you truly feel, this is it. This is the last one. I don't need anything anymore. And that moment you feel complete. That completeness is our spiritual birthright. And I believe, this is how I understand what he's saying. Now, I don't really think that the addict uses, the guy in the downtown east side, or the person for that matter in Shaughnessy who has another drink. He's not saying to themselves, my God, I want to be at one with the universe.
Expanding our view of healthcare beyond traditional medical models is essential for comprehensive health management. Alternative treatments and complementary medicine offer holistic approaches to health that address aspects often overlooked by conventional methods, recognizing the limitations of mainstream medicine and exploring additional avenues for care can enhance overall well-being and provide more effective solutions for various health issues. Embracing a broader perspective on healthcare encourages innovation and improves patient outcomes by integrating diverse approaches to health and wellness. Practicing mindfulness with activities like smoking and eating can lead to better health outcomes. By savoring each moment and being present with these activities, individuals can enhance their satisfaction and reduce compulsive behaviors. Mindful eating, for example, helps individuals enjoy their food more and prevent overeating. Applying mindfulness to various aspects of life encourages a more balanced and fulfilling approach to health and well-being. This approach promotes a healthier relationship with food and other behaviors, contributing to overall wellness and satisfaction. Early stress, particularly during crucial developmental periods, profoundly impacts the brain's development, altering both its structure and function. When a child encounters stress, whether from trauma, neglect, or other adverse conditions, it can significantly modify the brain's wiring and chemistry. Stress during these formative years often leads to a reduction in dopamine and endorphin receptors, which are essential for experiencing pleasure and regulating mood. This means that the brain requires more stimulation to achieve the same level of satisfaction. As a result, individuals may face difficulties in emotional regulation, increased vulnerability to mental health issues, and impaired cognitive functions. The long-term effects of early stress can influence behavior, learning abilities, and overall well-being throughout a person's life. Recognizing these impacts is crucial for creating effective strategies to support those who have experienced early stress. Interventions such as mindfulness practices, supportive care, and trauma-informed approaches can help mitigate these effects, promote healthier brain development, and foster resilience. By addressing the consequences of early stress on brain development, we can better support individuals in achieving emotional balance and improving their overall quality of life.
Like they're not consciously looking for a spiritual experience, but they are looking for the essence of it, which is completion. And where you really don't need. Zorba the Greek said, I'm not afraid of anything, I don't need anything, I'm free. So we're looking for that freedom, and that freedom is a spiritual quality. So I think that's saying he's right. But I think he skips the stage, which is the stage of trauma.
In your experience, is it true though that if people find different ways to experience spiritual experience that they will?
It's not true because as soon as you say to yourself that I need to have this experience to feel complete, you're wounding yourself because you're saying that I'm not complete. So it's not possible to satiate the need for completion by not seeing your wholeness. So it's a temporary seeking of a state that resembles completion, but it's temporary. And you always need another one and another one and another one. So I think that's one of those statements that has truth in it, but I think is lacking in, personally, I think it's lacking in depth.
In summary, understanding the complex interplay between obesity, trauma, and food culture is crucial for developing effective health strategies. By addressing these interconnected issues, we can work towards improving individual and public health. Comprehensive approaches that consider both psychological and physical aspects of health are essential for creating lasting change. As we move forward, let's focus on fostering healthier relationships with food and supporting overall well-being through informed choices and systemic changes. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Recognizing the connection between childhood trauma and obesity offers a new perspective on health. By addressing these underlying issues, we can develop more effective strategies for managing weight and improving well-being. If this topic resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insights and practical advice. We're exploring these critical issues together, so stay tuned.